Alright, so let's talk about object-oriented programming. So, object-oriented programming, or OOP, is a method of writing code where the idea is that you map out the problem you're trying to solve, or the domain, if you will, that you're working in, into a, let's call it a model, or a domain model. And that's a fancy way of saying that you create objects that hold information and functionality that is related to that concept in your system. So let's say that I wanted to make a forum application. Well, then I know that the bare minimum of the things I need is I need to be able to make posts, and I need to have users that create those posts. So here we have an example of that exact thing. I create a post object which takes a user and a text, and it returns an object that holds the user and the text, and it creates a date. These are fairly simple concepts. I'm thinking that that's where we want to start, right? And then we know that if we have a user, well, we need a user object. So we have a user object which takes a name, an email, and a password. It has a function called isUserLoggedIn, which does a fetch to some endpoint, which is namespace under login, or that's the URL anyway, so that seems to be an okay thing to do. And then we have a function for creating a post where it's going to make a request to the post endpoint, and it's going to contain a post object. So that seems to be, yeah, I think I'm happy with this. This is going to do for our example. And then you return this object. And now that we have a domain model, we can actually start doing some cool stuff. So we start by creating a user, which has the name Frederick, an email, and a password. And then let's say that we wanted to make the functionality of creating a post. Well, then we would do me.isUserLoggedIn. We get the response, which is a JSON object, or we assume that it's JSON. In my system it is. And we get a body, and then we check, well, body does isUserLoggedIn. This is the response we would get from the server. Now this is just an example, but in theory this will work the same way. So we're checking, is the user logged in? And if the user is logged in, well, then we create a post. However, if the user is not logged in, well, then we just log out an error message saying that you have to be logged in first. And if something goes wrong, we catch that error and we simply log that error out. Now this is just a simplistic and let's call it just a very simple example, but the actual fact of the matter is that this is not very far from the type of functionality you would see in most systems. This is a simple version of something that you will see when you create really advanced applications. So I hope this makes sense to you. The idea behind object-oriented programming is that, as I said, you create a domain model, you try to map out the different objects that you need, and then you put the functionality that they need to be able to do inside of that object.